Welcome, everybody, to the CAJM Talking Circle. Thank you very much, uh, Vanessa, Hillary, and Luisa, for joining us today to present on new Jewish rituals uh, and the objects associated with them. It's been my observation for many years that Jewish rituals, and particularly new Jewish rituals, have had a backseat in Jewish museum exhibition and programming. uh, this is really one of a range of subjects that has not been tackled effectively by Jewish museums for decades now. Uh, and yet, these rituals and ceremonies and the objects associated with them are often critical to the vitality and richness of Jewish life in contemporary America. Uh, uh, Vanessa pointed out that the last major exhibition that featured new Jewish ritual objects was circulated in 2009, which is a fair time to go without dealing with the subject of such uh, relevance and importance. So today we're going to have three speakers in quick succession, followed by an opportunity for Q&A and conversation, essentially trying to get at some of the fundamentals of why these rituals have come into being, uh, what purposes they serve, and how new Jewish rituals come into being altogether. Uh, and we'll run from the historical past, recent past, right to the present moment when our last presenter will actually present a ritual in the making, as it were. Vanessa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Avi, for this invitation and for me to have the opportunity to share a platform with two brilliant new Jewish ritualists, Rabbi Cantor, Hillary Chorny, and Cantor Rabbi Luisa Sinacore. As you can see, it is an extraordinary thing just to be in the presence of a Rabbi Cantor and a Cantor Rabbi. This does not happen for any of us. So we all have dinner time conversation already. But titles aside, we are in the presence of two practitioners who are really changing the landscape of Jewish ritual in America. So as a scholar, I was at University of Virginia for 25 years in the Department of Religious Studies. I'm an anthropologist of religion, and I've been studying new Jewish ritual. Uh, and when I began, and I'm going to give a little bit of a trajectory, so I'm the historical piece here. When I began to study new Jewish ritual, I would say that there were two types that were primary. There were rituals that expressed feminism, and in some of these rituals were what we feminists at the time called add women and stir rituals. Women didn't have a kippah, so you put a pink one on a woman's head, and now it was a kippah. Bat mitzvah, you did a bar mitzvah, but a woman was playing the role. A woman's talit, same talit, but you made it pink or you added flowers. Funny enough that young women I heard years ago who were about to have a bat mitzvah said, the last thing I want for my bat mitzvah talit is a bubby talit. And the mother said, what's a bubby talit? You know, one with flowers, one that's pink, one that's silky. I want a real talit. So I thought that was funny that this innovative Jewish object of not that long ago had already turned into a granny relic. Important in So there were also, in terms of feminist rituals, there were also rituals that marked events in women's lives that had never been marked before in public or even semi-private ways, such as the beginning of menses, the beginning of menopause, uh, issues of getting pregnant, losing a child, issues of infertility, adopting a baby. And then there were all kinds of democratic rituals that expressed democracy. I would say the whole Chavurah movement was about real people in their own backyards, in their own basements and dens, created meaningful services where a rabbi or a cantor were not necessary. They were certainly invited, but they were not necessary. That belief that any Jew could by reading the Jewish catalog, volume one or volume two, could figure out Jewish stuff and bring it into their lives. Um, many of the new Passover many of the new Passover Haggadot or Passover supplements also reflected a kind of democracy that you could, if you cared about social justice, you could make a Haggadah for your own family, and this was before Haggadot.com, by cutting and literally cutting and pasting and Xeroxing. And you could make a Haggadah for your own family. You didn't have to be a rabbi. You didn't have to be a pro. So I'd say that would be the first era of ritual innovation that I was looking at in my life. The next era that I came to look at was were the rituals that emerged during COVID. All forms of virtual expression, including the Zoom Seder, the one-person Seder, the drive-through congregational sukkah, uh, obviously all kinds of masks that expressed our feelings during COVID. And I would say that there's much to celebrate in terms of what we created during COVID and certain virtual forms, which then we thought of as being less than an in-person live encounter, began to be thought of as quite remarkable. For instance, the Zoom Shiva, which many people continue to do a Zoom Shiva so they can sit together with people around the world and to offer a 360-degree um, vision of the person that was lost and to share that with the bereaved person or family, to share that back with them. And another beautiful COVID ritual that I've been thinking a great deal about and continue to participate in is the Kaddish minyan offered by My Jewish Learning, which any of you who started saying Kaddish during COVID, and I did, it was the savior, where you could come at 4 o'clock every day except for Shabbat. You could come together. Someone would teach Torah for 10 minutes out of gratitude. I started saying, please let me give back to you. I'll teach some of the Torah. I mean, it was, for me, it was better than going to a virtual Shacharit minyan, because I could knock it off in 11 minutes, which I really liked. And people use the chat room. Like, who would think that a chat room would be so expressive of personal stories? Because the incredible leader, Ben Harris, would say, in the chat room, put down who you lost, or maybe where you are, or something about them. And people were saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I didn't know," and people would form connections. The third era of uh, of Jewish ritual innovation that I've been looking at, and I feel finally it's coming to a close, has been the rituals that emerged in right after October 7th. And those were rituals that emerged in Israel. And I think, to my shock, I was surprised that in America we would be developing our own series of ways that we were expressing a connection to October 7th and the losses, and our yearnings, and our fears and anxieties for the hostages, even our gratitude when the hostages and the last remains were brought back. Um, in that era, and I think if you're wondering, like what are we talking about? I think of the empty Shabbat table as a strong visual artistic creation. And by the way, that creation was a creation of artists, and media professionals. It wasn't rabbis who created the Shabbat table in Israel. I know Rabbi Cantor Chorny has a different and wonderful kind of story, which perhaps she will be featuring in her forthcoming book, A New Jewish Ritual. Um, those rituals also had another object, was and a morphing object was the dog tag for hostages, which people wore, and then that became a pin. a yellow pin, and in some cases it became a ribbon. And it was very moving how when the hostages were returned, some synagogues, I know Addis Israel did this in Washington, D.C., because I saw the video, there was a ceremony of putting a basket on the bima where people put their hostage objects in it. And if they were metal, there was the plan that artists would create some object out of them. So there was a kind of a life cycle because people felt like when they took off the ribbon or the pin, they felt like part of their heart was being torn away. And I really, I understand that sentiment. So I'm really curious to hear from my colleagues what they're thinking about in terms of new ritual. And I just before I turn it over to them, I want to say how that the times that new Jewish ritual has been featured in American Jewish museums have not only celebrated those new rituals, but have affirmed them and have given an incentive to Jewish and not Jewish or secular Jewish artists the impetus and the information necessary to create brand new ritual objects. And we witness all those wonderful exhibits that we saw at the Contemporary Jewish Museum in California of the Kiddush Cup Invitational and the Tzedakah Box Invitational. So I pass it on now to my colleague, Rabbi Cantor Hilary Chorny.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Really, all the work that I do stands on your shoulders, and I will be forever grateful for the people in your shoes who do academic peer-reviewed work, so that I can stick to pastoring and storytelling, and the creation of new Jewish ritual. So my hope is that in sharing some visuals, what I'll do is exactly that, some storytelling about my experiences, a little bit of historiography, right? Explaining how it is that we've been documenting some of the things that we've been doing, and to speak about those last two of the three eras as one large particular era, looking back at the past 25 years. So I'm just going to plug and say, if you haven't picked up Vanessa's book that won the National Jewish Book Award in 2007 or published in 2007, don't remember exactly which year it won, I can't speak highly enough of it. And it was really a retrospective that took us all the way through the end of the 20th century. So what I'd like to think about with you today is what's been happening since a little bit, and look at it in visuals as an entirety of an era, and showcase some of the experiences I've had in working in congregational life. So I want to take us through just a very quick set of points, talk about the number of crises we've walked through, this notion of unprecedented times and an era of globalization and the 24-hour news cycle, to speak a little bit about the rise of anti-Semitism and the intersection of that and ritual, the new normal, and to showcase some visuals, some of which Vanessa referenced just now. So they'll serve as hopefully visual references to some of what she's set up. I found a journal entry from 2022, my writing out to our community, and I highlighted some of the phrases that stick out to me. This is, again, 2022, pre-October 7th. We are crushed in a riptide of anti-Semitism from both right and left. And I'm speaking about this because this is the day after the Colleyville hostage situation in the synagogue in Texas. And in that moment, we were still in COVID mode, and we were still experiencing anti-Semitism. And here we were watching another hostage crisis. And I write, if you're tired, I'm with you. It's exhausting. Dayenu. And this crisis mode, it has to do with this idea, as I said, of an archipelago of unprecedented times. The Google Ngram tracks that there's a 1,300% immediate rise in the phrase unprecedented times in published works in the world in the year 2020. What does it mean that we're unprecedented? I'll speak to unprecedented at the very end in terms of a Jewish phrase, but broadly speaking, we've never seen this before. We've never responded to it before. And that's what ritual has had to contend with, was all these unprecedented times. And that intersects with two other things going on. Some of you might remember Guns, Germs, and Steel. I think that was my first real deep dive into an economics book. And at the time, what Thomas Friedman was speaking about was this idea that we're hitting a third phase of globalization. What did he say? We're going from a size small to a size tiny. Now we're talking about the globalization of individuals. So what people were experiencing starting in really in the early aughts was this hyper localization. Everything, everywhere, all at once. So, ritual, as Vanessa was speaking to this idea of American Jewry responding live in real time to the events in Israel, has a lot to do, from my perspective, with how close we feel to what's happening there. American Jews are just a click apart, right? They're just a Facebook call away from their relatives there. They're immediately getting news in their pocket. And to speak to that idea too, I just have a few sources that I'm quoting here, so you know that I'm getting them from someone somewhere. So I went back to the Berkeley Economic Review, which speaks, has like quite a few reviews of this idea of salience bias, which is this idea that actually the 24-hour news cycle is failing us. And they quote Jon Stewart, which I love because, you know, who doesn't love a good Jon Stewart quote? He says that news outlets are elevating the stakes of every moment and putting the public in the information blast zone. And this causes a breakdown in information dissemination. What does this look like for me as a rabbi of 1,000 family congregation? People running up to me at 9:45 on a Shabbat morning to say, I know you don't look at news over Shabbat, but did you hear X happened? Are you going to say something from the Bima? So there is an urgency that is pushed upon the Jewish people and their lived reality and their religious responses by that 24-hour news cycle. Vanessa and I once had a conversation, and I said, is this what it looked like in the 70s and 80s as you're writing about all these experiences? And I hope I quote you correctly in your presence, Vanessa. I believe you said something like, something huge would happen in August and we'd be talking about what we do at Seder about it, right? And that idea that we no longer have that deliberate pause, I am going to speak for hours about it tomorrow at Shavuot. I'm speaking about this like failure of urgency in the Jewish counterculture, but like we're really in a new reality of trying to respond with ritual as quickly as news does. And that has created all sorts of craziness. And we can't miss the fact that there's a 361% rise in anti-Semitism. That is a fact, that's a statistic from 2025. I wouldn't be surprised if that's even gone up since. And again, speaking to this idea of hyper-localism and globalization feel, like when the Bondi Beach incident happened, what do we do in our congregations in Los Angeles, California, because so-and-so's sister-in-law was there on the beach? How do we respond? Does an email go out? Do we write a prayer? We are really talking about a new Jewish normal of ritual response. And I pulled from my colleague, Rabbi Rachel Ain, who's one of my great mentors back at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, who, when COVID hit, speaking, this is one of those Zoom minions that Vanessa was referring to, what did she say? She said, I was ahead of them. I made the decision for my community based on how I understood what my community needed at that moment. It's a change in the tenor of the way that pastoral caregivers, specifically rabbis in the liberal Jewish movements, but I want to say in the liberal Jewish movements that had, generally speaking, wanted to over-explain themselves in the choices they were making in ritual and Jewish practice. And now you don't have over-explanation, you have response with urgency in real time. How do I get my community together? And there she's sitting with a virtual backdrop of the Sutton Place Synagogue behind her as she sits at her dining room table. So I want to share with you some visuals of the ritual responses we've seen in this era of urgency. I'm one of the vice presidents and one of the officers of the Cantor's Assembly. Our current president is Jeffrey Myers, who is the Rabbi Cantor, who was serving as the primary clergy person at the time of the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh in 2018. And here you see this really extraordinary piece of art that was created. I was one of the investors and had 40 colleagues who put together this really gorgeous Torah cover. But it wasn't just a new Torah cover for the Torah to renew their Torahs in their own art. It took a tour all around the country. When it came to our synagogue in Los Angeles, we actually hosted an event with our Muslim brothers and sisters. It was 2018, a totally different era. And we spoke about the violation of religious spaces and what we're doing with art to reclaim those religious spaces. I could speak for, again, hours about this particular Torah cover and event, but what an extraordinary artifact of that time. just to speak a little bit about COVID and urgency in the creation of things, we have these amazing testimonies as the COVID vaccine came out. Rabbi said, "Oh my gosh, we have to respond with ritual. What are we going to do?" This is one of my very favorites. This is the production in the sort of handwriting style print that my colleague Lisa Gelber created with her daughter Zahara, who was afraid of needles. So what they wrote together, I'll just read a little from the middle. "Today I am scared. I do not like needles. In my heart, I know this vaccine is good for me. It will keep me safe and help others too. Help me feel your sukkah of shalom as the nurse works with you to keep me safe." This is what people were putting in their pockets as here in Los Angeles, we drove to Dodger Stadium to get those vaccines and just expressing gratitude in real time. But my favorite part of all is that this is one of 8 different prayers just published on the Rabbinical Assembly website alone. Different prayers, responses, gratitude recitations, and we have collections of these prayers that emerged just in that moment. Just want to mention the family asked that I not share pictures of this, but we did have a Zoom bat mitzvah. We had very few Zoom bat mitzvahs. We wound up doing a lot outdoors here in Los Angeles, blessed with fields and good weather. But I wanted to just point out one particular piece. You can read the other stuff I have on the sheet if you're more of a visual person. But I do want to say we have pictures from people of these car parades that they did. So people, what they would do is they wanted their friends and family after locally. They wanted their friends and family to see their faces after their Zoom celebrations. So they would arrange for cars to drive by and put signs out the window and balloons. We have whole collections of videos that people took of honking and shouting Mazel Tov out the window. And later, when things got a little safer, people standing at a distance at the edge of a lawn. Just a few extra pictures I want to share with you. 2 visuals for something that Vanessa already mentioned. One I just put up here. This is the email I sent to my there's a name for this. It's called simultaneous invention. It's like when 2 movies about Pinocchio come out from 2 different studios at the same time. So here in Los Angeles, I wrote this email to my colleagues. There's this beautiful ritual done in military communities when people are missing in action or captured. What is it? It's the POW MIA table. 3 days later, there was a JTA wire story about that table out in Tel Aviv. I also have a picture of a woman. This is in the Philadelphia National Mall, called by the British Jewry to actually set an extra place at your own home Shabbat table, which of course people did, expanding that into that private realm beyond the public realm as well. And then I wanted to share with you something specifically we experienced here at Temple Beth Am. I'll close up with this and with one last slide, that we have a geniza in the garden here, right, to bury ritual objects that can no longer be used. And I have no idea if it was simultaneous. I think the Addis Israel thing took place just a little bit after we had done this event. But what we did was we partnered with a tattoo artist for Israel who also do graffiti art. And we had our students create graffiti art here at our day school at Pressman Academy. And then we had an art exhibition partnered with a Geniza. This is the artist Jonathan York speaking about a piece he'd had at the Skirball and was donating to us, a Mizrach created from the burnt remains of Sukkot that were in a kibbutz on October 7th. So you have that hanging on the wall in our cafe. And we're preparing to bury those dog tags, those yellow ribbons, all of those items that people wanted to part with, but still treat with Kedusha, treat it with sanctity. And I'm standing with some local community leaders, my partner, Rabbi Adam Kligfeld, on the bima, and our friend and tattoo artist who organized the event. So I'll just name that there are 4 ritual paradigms that I'm seeing in this era of 25 years of urgency. One is that paradigm of what's private and what's communal, like you see at those empty chairs and empty tables. The immediate and the slow burn responses, the difference between those COVID vaccine prayers that kind of scattershot emerged at one time, or lots of different announcements about chairs and tables, versus the creation of that Tree of Life Torah cover, which was a whole deliberate and elaborate fundraising and art project. There's the particular versus the universal stuff, right? The idea that COVID was experienced by all of humanity, but we as Jews had our own particular Jewish responses. But the Tree of Life shooting was, of course, something that we felt happened to us. So how is ritual going to respond to the particular? And finally, you've got the rooted and the uprooted. I just want to say, I'll stop the screen share and see your faces. The most amazing thing to me about the phrase unprecedented times is that Judaism and ritual is all about precedent. we might break with precedent, but it's usually a consideration. The notion is to build on rootedness. And here we're living in an era where we're saying all the time a 1300% rise in that phrase. If we're living in unprecedented times, perhaps it's inviting us to have just unprecedented types of ritual. So I'll end there and toss it off to my new acquaintance, Luisa, Cantor Rabbi Sinacore, who has some other types of visuals and videos to share.
Thank you so much. I have to say it's such a gift to be able to learn with both you and Rabbi Ochs this morning. I will also say that Rabbi Ochs was pretty foundational to the research that I've been doing and the work I've been doing, and her book is stellar. So really a gift to share this conversation with both of you. I want to talk about this specific project I've been working on. I started with a research project which was interviewing New York clergy across the denominational spectrum. So we had people who were non-denominational, we had Reform Jews and conservative Jews, we had a Chavurah, and we had a modern Orthodox congregation. Now the caveat being, if they were willing to meet with me as a Reform rabbi, there was a certain level of liberalism that was part of the conversation, and we didn't have any Hasidim part of the conversation. And still, I think it represents a large spectrum of what's happening at the forefront of American Judaism right now. So I did this research project where I sat with them and we talked about new ritual and ritual innovation post October 7th. And from there was a clear finding that said, functionally, clergy are in crisis. We're seeing some of the largest dissatisfaction in clerical work and a real crisis of mental health and burnout, compassion fatigue amidst our clergy right now. And so what is one of the ways that we can respond to this moment of crises? Well, a lot of us went into this job because we thought ritual mattered, because we had a ritual moment that was significant to us. And so I wanted us to have a chance to reclaim ritual. But what happens when ritual becomes your job? Well, it's very hard for it to then also be a therapeutic tool. So as part of this concert project, I had rabbis, cantors, and experienced lay people, or soon to be rabbis and cantors, write new ritual and music for me for the concert. We premiered 11 new rituals as part of the program. I'm going to share with you, obviously we don't have time to watch the entire program, but I will share the link both to the program, which if you think about it is a form of kind of object representative of something that's pretty ephemeral, right? When we talk about ritual objects, we often think about things that are concretized, right? And in the case of music, it's very difficult because what do you share? Do you share the recording? Do you share the sheet music? Like, what is it that makes that an object? Because so often we don't have, right? It's like a moment that's not captured in time. And one of the things that came out from clergy is that if I'm doing a ritual for work, it's not going to help me when I'm at home. And so the idea of having new rituals that could speak to this particular moment, that could help facilitate better care for our clergy, felt really important. But I think coming out of that, there is something to be said about American Judaism right now, where there so often is this professionalization of ritual, where congregants hand off their rituals to their clergy as their responsibility for facilitating those moments. And I think what can be learned about commissioning new rituals in part is that if we empower everyone to start thinking about the moments in their lives that are meaningful, or that they are requiring some kind of aid in transition, that they also can use the tools that were part of this program to help facilitate rituals for themselves. So I think it's worth also going back and saying, because we haven't really talked about it, what does ritual mean? Well, it means a lot of different things to different people. And so, when I'm commissioning rituals and I say, write me a ritual, or if I'm interviewing somebody about, tell me about rituals you did post October 7th, and there isn't a clear definition, it means that it can be a lot of things, right? I think what I found, some of the unifying elements was everybody thinks prayer is ritual. unquestionably, but that the prayer adjacent pieces are the things that ritual becomes kind of gray, right? But it's stuff that helps facilitate prayer or gives prayer an intention. And I think music is an interesting example of that because, when we include ritual, when we include music in services, when does it become ritual? If the text is prayer, if the music is written by a Jewish person, if it leads to a prayerful moment. So one of the examples that came up in the concert was I paired typically a ritual writer, so somebody who would give a spoken component with somebody who would write a musical component, which really added to this creativity of this kind of how do people think about ritual, because there were two people then collaborating on the ritual. And one of the rituals that was come up with was an additional blessing added to a Havdalah service. And it came from a Yehuda Amichai text about how Havdalah, this separation of Shabbat and the rest of the week, also allows for the separation of self and the self. That's how Yehuda Amichai puts it, right? So Jeremy Sipe, who wrote the music for this piece, it's called Ani Mavdil. He talks about how do we unweave that which is holy and not, or that which we gain on Shabbat that's holy, and what which we lose at the end of Shabbat, and how do we weave them back together as we enter a new week of routine. So I'm going to play a section of it, and I think what's so powerful about this ritual is that he wrote it to seamlessly be woven into people's habitual Havdalah practices. So it doesn't take away from, it adds to. Hold on one sec. So if you notice, there's a seamless key transition right away, so that helps us transition from a prayer that's very familiar to something that's new. But it also, the mode of the music feels familiar, right? The tempo, the pacing, right? It aligns with our other music that we're really accustomed to singing during Havdalah, and I think that makes this add of new ritual really seamless. Right? Because the thing about writing new ritual is it's inherently disruptive. So how do we make that which is inherently disruptive not uncomfortable? And I think there's a couple ways. One of them is actually consent culture, right? So how do we think about ways in which we are making sure that all the participants feel like they have consented to this practice, right? A matbeya, a clear kind of set liturgy helps. Stuff that's in people's sidurim, stuff that's in their prayer books already helps. But also with an expectation of prayer as evolving and as changing over time, right? There is a set kind of baseline that people expect so long as those practices are grounded in the familiar. So I'm going to give you another example of something that's grounded in the familiar, but breaks from that a little bit. One of the pieces for the concert was a memorial piece for two scholars that have passed away recently who were really giants in the Jewish world, Rabbi Andrea Weiss, Alav Sholem, and Cantor Bob Robert Abelson, and their loss was just tremendous. We lost both of them this year, and so one of the pieces was written in their honor. And so we had, how do you kind of bring in a memorial piece that feels new and innovative and speaks to this moment, but also touches on the past? Will you use Psalm Adonai Ro'i, Psalm 23, which is like, we are so expecting that in a funeral moment, so that text feels familiar, but I interwove in texts written by those who we lost. And then on the object side of thing, we had a memorial candle, and we had a memorial picture of each of them with may their memory be for a blessing that was displayed. And so right away, people are accustomed to that visual cue of there's a memorial candle, there's a memorial picture. I know this is a moment of memorial, even though the way, the melody and the words feel really radically new. So I'll just share that quickly. So you'll see that the voices are in conversation with one another, and then the image of God as Adonai Ro'i, God as shepherd, God as teacher, right? That could be translated as teacher. These are two great scholars who are teachers, right? Becomes in conversation with the words of these scholars, right? And so it's kind of interwoven in this tapestry of that which is super familiar and also that which speaks to this specific moment in time. And I think that's my time.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you all very much. This has really been spectacular, to put it mildly, including the questions that have been raised. And certainly in my mind, what exactly do we mean by a ritual? Really a complicated question, as I'm seeing now. And what do we also mean by an object, as in the traditional museum's terminology, stuff? Exactly what is the stuff of new Jewish ritual, and how are we going to deal with it? I'm a little thrown because a lot of our responses seem to be responses either to long-term need, as in feminism, or to an immediate crisis, as in 10/7. And my first question would be a pretty obvious one, and that is, what new or recently new Jewish rituals have been put out there specifically to deal with positive changes in Jewish life in America?